Elsewhere, the UN Security Council is set to vote in a few hours on a resolution demanding a ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas, which is labeled as a terrorist organization in many countries. The Algeria-sponsored plan, representing several Arab nations, calls for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, as well as the release of all hostages. The U.S. has said that it will veto that resolution and has instead proposed its own. It calls for a temporary ceasefire linked to the release of hostages. It is yet unclear if the U.S. resolution will be put to a vote as well. For more context, let's bring in DW correspondent Amien Essif, who has the view right now from Jerusalem. So, why two resolutions? What's different between them?
Well, there's actually a lot less difference than you might think. It essentially boils down to the wording on the time frame for the ceasefire. So whereas the Algerian ceasefire resolution calls for an immediate ceasefire, the UN resolution calls for a ceasefire and the release of hostages when practicable. Both call for the release of hostages, of course. But that is because the U.S. is worried that the ongoing negotiations between Israel and Hamas for a ceasefire deal that would be linked to the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas, they're worried that that would fall apart if a resolution passed that called for an immediate ceasefire. Now, those talks have been going on for a couple of weeks, led by the U.S. and the United Arab Emirates, and they have basically fallen apart after Israel withdrew, saying that the Hamas demands were delusional. So the U.S. really wants to keep up pressure on both sides to get a ceasefire deal. What's interesting here, though, is that the wording in this UN resolution, which could be proposed after the Algerian resolution is vetoed, the wording there is much stronger than we've seen in past U.S. resolutions, which has often been very watered down. This is the first resolution the U.S. proposed that is actually using the word ceasefire. So that shows you how far the Biden administration has come in being critical of Israel's war on Gaza.
And Amien, the U.S. has been very vocal in its criticism of Israel's planned operations in Rafah. Has Israel taken on board that criticism?
Publicly, they've been very defiant, and there is no signs that they're actually questioning whether or not they should go ahead with this ground assault in Rafah. The delay might, after the announcement of the ground assault in Rafah, there's been quite a bit of delay and no time frame given by Israeli military yet. That might suggest that they are taking into account some things that their closest allies are saying about how this would be a disaster for security in the region and a humanitarian disaster. But they still haven't put forward any plan to save the lives of civilians. There's 1.3 million Gazans who are up against the Egyptian border there in Rafah. It's the last city in Gaza Strip that still has functioning infrastructure. So it's very unclear where people are supposed to go. But Israel has said that if they don't see the release of all Israeli hostages by March 10th, that's the beginning of Ramadan, then they will go ahead with this ground assault.
Talk with us about the pressure that the Israeli government is under to ensure the safe release of the remaining hostages.
There are many families in Israel who go out once a week at least in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and other places demanding that the government, the Netanyahu government, does a lot more to release these hostages. Don't forget that a hostage deal basically is the only way to release mass hostages through nonviolent means, essentially. The last deal, they saw about 100 hostages released by Hamas coming home to their families, and a lot of the families that still have people who are being held by Hamas in Gaza, they want to see their relatives freed. Israel has basically stalled on any talks to release hostages and have asked, they basically want to use military means, and that angers a lot of families in Israel.
Amien Essif in Jerusalem, thank you.